Dusty Gulch's iron grip. Dusty Gulch smelled of stale beer, desperation, and something vaguely metallic, like blood drying on sun-baked earth. Flies buzzed lazily around the overflowing troughs outside the saloon, adding their droning chorus to the discordant piano music spilling onto the street. A mangy dog gnawed on a discarded bone in the shade of the general store, its ribs showing through its matted fur. This was a town where justice came cheap, and Sheriff Jedediah Barlow set the price. He leaned back in his chair on the makeshift stage, a greasy smile plastered across his face. The midday sun glinted off the badge pinned to his vest, a warped reflection of the warped law he represented. He surveyed the crowd, a motley assortment of miners, ranchers, and drifters, their faces etched with greed and a certain grim anticipation. "All right, folks, let's not waste any more daylight," Barlow drawled, his voice thick with the authority he so relished. He gestured towards Caroline, who stood beside him, her head held high despite the tremor in her hands. Her simple cotton dress was clean, but did little to conceal the fear in her eyes. Caroline hadn't stolen the gold. She'd merely been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of a drunken brawl between two rival miners. Barlow, never one to let an opportunity pass, had seized the moment, accusing her of theft and sentencing her to the auction block. The gold, of course, was now lining his own pockets. "We have here," Barlow continued, his voice dripping with mock sincerity, "a fine, upstanding young woman, capable of many things. She's strong, she's healthy, and she's eager to please." A ripple of coarse laughter ran through the crowd. Caroline flinched, but refused to meet their gaze. "Now, I'm starting the bidding at $50, Barlow announced, his eyes scanning the crowd for eager bidders. "Who'll give me 50? A beefy man with a scarred face and missing teeth raised his hand. 50, 50. I have 50. Do I hear 60? Barlow's voice was like a whip, cracking through the air. The bidding escalated quickly, fueled by lust and the unspoken knowledge that Barlow's favor was a valuable commodity in Dusty Gulch. Caroline felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. Each bid was a hammer blow, chipping away at her dignity, her hope. She closed her eyes, picturing her family's small farm back east, the scent of wildflowers, the sound of her mother's laughter. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago, another world entirely. 150! A voice boomed from the back of the crowd. It was Jebediah Smith, the owner of the Golden Nugget Saloon, a man known for his ruthlessness and his deep pockets. Barlow grinned. 150. We have a serious contender, folks. Anyone willing to go higher? Silence. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if anyone would challenge Smith's bid. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest. $150. Her life, reduced to a price, a transaction. Barlow let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring the tension. Then, just as he was about to declare Smith the winner, a voice cut through the air, clear and sharp as a gunshot. 200. All eyes turned towards the speaker. A stranger stood at the edge of the crowd, a tall, lean figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He wore a weather duster and a low-slung gun belt. His face was hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but there was a steely glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down Caroline's spine. Barlow's face darkened. This wasn't part of the plan. He'd expected Smith to win, to ensure his continued patronage at the Golden Nugget. This stranger was disrupting his carefully orchestrated game. "And who might you be, friend?" Barlow asked, his voice laced with menace. The stranger didn't answer. He simply stepped forward, his hand hovering near the handle of his gun. 250, Smith growled, his face flushed with anger. He wouldn't be outbid, not in front of the whole town. 300, the stranger countered, his voice unwavering. The crowd gasped. $300 was a fortune in Dusty Gulch. Even Smith hesitated, his hand reaching for his own gun. Barlow knew he had to regain control of the situation, and fast. This auction was spiraling out of his control. All right, let's not get hasty," he said, trying to sound reasonable, though his eyes glinted with anger. "Let's see if Mr. Smith here wants to up the ante." Smith glared at the stranger, then at Barlow. He knew he was being played, but pride wouldn't let him back down. 350. The stranger tilted his head slightly, considering. Then, with a voice that held the promise of thunder, he said, "I'm not bidding on her." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. The stranger then raised his voice, addressing the crowd at large, and especially Sheriff Barlow. "I'm paying her fine." Barlow, caught off guard, sputtered, "Her fine is whatever the auction yields." The stranger's hand moved with lightning speed. A shot rang out, echoing through the dusty street. Smith clutched his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing to the ground. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the mangy dog. The stranger holstered his gun, his gaze fixed on Barlow. "Now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is she free to go?" A stranger rides in. The gavel fell. "Sold. To Bart Hummer for $200. Caroline's breath hitched. Hummer, a hulking brute with eyes that devoured her, grinned, teeth stained brown with tobacco. She braced for his touch, already tasting the bile of despair. Then, a shadow fell across the dusty street. All eyes turned. A lone rider, silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun, sat astride a dark Appaloosa. He was a study in quiet menace, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. Dust devils danced around his horse's hooves. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the nervous whinny of a horse tethered nearby. Sheriff Jedediah Barlow, his face flushed with greed and whiskey, squinted. "State your business, stranger." The rider didn't answer. He simply dismounted, the movement fluid and practiced. He walked towards the makeshift auction block, his spurs chiming a slow, deliberate rhythm on the packed earth. He stopped directly in front of Hummer, the distance between them close enough to smell the man's sour sweat. Still, he didn't speak, didn't even look at Hummer. His gaze was fixed on Caroline. In his eyes, she saw not lust or avarice, but a deep, unsettling sadness. Hummer, emboldened by the crowd's murmurs, puffed out his chest. "You got a problem, friend?" The rider finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. "She ain't for sale." Before Hummer could retort, the rider's hand moved with impossible speed. The Colt Peacemaker appeared, as if conjured from thin air. The shot echoed, ripping through the stunned silence. Hummer crumpled, a crimson stain blooming on his chest. Chaos erupted. Barlow bellowed, "Get him!" He fumbled for his own sidearm. The rider, Eli, spun, firing twice more. Two of Barlow's deputies dropped, clutching their legs and howling. He moved with a deadly grace, a whirlwind of controlled violence. Caroline, momentarily paralyzed, found her legs. She scrambled down from the auction block, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eli reached her, his hand closing around her wrist. His grip was firm, reassuring. "Run," he commanded, his eyes never leaving the swirling melee. He fired again, forcing Barlow to duck behind the judge's table. Then, pulling Caroline behind him, he sprinted toward his horse. They mounted, Eli swinging her up behind him. The Appaloosa surged forward, scattering the crowd. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust. They tore through Dusty Gulch, a cloud of dust their only shield. Barlow's men, some mounted, others on foot, gave chase, their shouts fading behind them. Once clear of the town, Eli didn't slow. He urged the Appaloosa onward, pushing it to its limit. The landscape blurred into a tapestry of scrub brush and red rock. After what felt like an eternity, he finally reined in at a small creek, hidden within a stand of cottonwood trees. The horse, lathered and breathing hard, drank deeply. Eli dismounted, his movements weary. He turned to Caroline, his face etched with a grim resolve. "Are you hurt?" Caroline shook her head, still catching her breath. "No, just stunned." She looked back in the direction of Dusty Gulch, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "What did you do back there?" He shrugged, his gaze distant. "Something that needed doing." He walked to the creek, cupped his hands, and drank. Caroline watched him, a whirlwind of emotions churning inside her. gratitude, fear, confusion, and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned back, his eyes, the color of flint, met hers. "Someone trying to make amends." He paused, then added, his voice low, "My name is Eli Stone, and we need to keep moving." Across the scorched earth, the sun was a hammer, beating against the cracked earth. Each step Eli took kicked up dust that tasted like ash and clung to the back of Caroline's throat. She tied a strip of cloth across her nose and mouth, but it offered little relief. The landscape stretched before them, an endless canvas of ochre and rust, punctuated by skeletal rock formations that offered no shade. "How much further?" she asked, her voice muffled by the fabric. Eli scanned the horizon, his gaze narrowed against the glare. "Another day, maybe two. Depends on the mules." He didn't elaborate, and Caroline knew better than to press. Every word felt like a precious commodity, best conserved. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of leather and the rhythmic plodding of the mules. "Caroline, voce Eli." He walked with a grim purpose, his shoulders squared against the relentless heat. His face was etched with lines that spoke of hardship and loss, secrets he held close. She wondered what haunted him. Suddenly, the air shifted. A low growl reverberated through the ground, almost imperceptible at first, then building in intensity. The sky, a brutal blue moments before, began to swirl with a sickly yellow hue. "Sandstorm," Eli barked, his voice urgent. "We need cover now." There was no cover to be had. They were in the open, exposed. Eli pulled Caroline close, shielding her with his body as the wind picked up, whipping sand into a frenzy. He shouted over the rising roar, "Get down. Cover your face." Caroline obeyed, pressing herself against the leeward side of a mule, burying her face in its coarse fur. The sand stung her skin like 1,000 needles. The wind howled, a demonic symphony that threatened to tear them apart. She could feel Eli's body tense against hers, a solid anchor in the chaos. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity. Finally, as abruptly as it had begun, it subsided. The world emerged, altered. The air was thick with dust, the landscape blurred and indistinct. One of the mules was gone, vanished into the sandy haze. Eli coughed, spitting out grit. He looked at Caroline, his eyes assessing her. "You all right?" She nodded, her throat raw. "Just gritty." She tried to smile, but her lips felt cracked and swollen. They salvaged what they could from the remaining mule, rationing the water even more carefully. As they walked, Eli pointed out landmarks. A strangely shaped mesa, a patch of scorched earth, teaching her how to read the desert. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in fiery hues, they made camp beside a cluster of jagged rocks. They ate sparingly, dried meat that tasted of salt and dust. The silence was less strained now, more companionable. "Where were you headed?" Eli asked, his voice low. Caroline hesitated. "West. California. Maybe. I heard there's work there." "Dreams always lead west," Eli said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "What about you?" Caroline asked, turning the question back on him. "Where are you headed?" Eli looked into the fire, his face shadowed. "Nowhere in particular. Just away." He didn't elaborate, but Caroline sensed a deep weariness in his words. "You saved me, back there," she said softly. "At the auction." "Why?" Eli shrugged. It didn't seem right. There were others who didn't think it was right, Caroline pointed out, but they didn't do anything. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe I just got tired of not doing anything." As the night deepened, they sat in silence, the vastness of the desert surrounding them. Caroline found herself telling him about her life before redemption, her family, the farm they'd lost, the dreams she'd harbored. Eli listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the fire. When she was finished, he said simply, "Life deals a hard hand sometimes." "Sometimes it feels like it deals a losing hand," Caroline admitted. Eli turned to face her, his eyes, usually guarded, filled with a surprising depth of understanding. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice rough but sincere. The game's not over till the last card is played. And in that moment, under the vast, star-studded sky, Caroline felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a fragile ember in the face of the scorched earth. A hope that maybe, just maybe, they could both find something worth fighting for. Canyon Hideaway. The earth conceded them entry. One moment, they were picking their way down a slope parched by the sun. The next, Eli was urging Caroline through a fissure in the rock face. The opening was so expertly masked it seemed improbable any creature knew of its existence. Beyond, the canyon exhaled, a clandestine realm of sandstone ramparts daubed with ochre and carmine streaks. A jade thread marked the canyon floor, a creek salvation. Caroline leaned against the cool stone, her lungs burning. Where? How did you even know about this place? Eli just shrugged, eyes flicking to the heights above. A former partner knew these trails, said it was ideal for vanishing. His words echoed, pregnant with untold history. The hush deepened, punctuated by the burbling of water. Drawn to it, Caroline cupped her hands, drinking deeply. The water was glacial and sweet, erasing the grit and dread. She turned back to Eli. He hadn't stirred, his face a map of familiar harshness. We should tend to those cuts, she suggested softly, indicating the crimson blossoming on his sleeve. He acquiesced without argument, settling heavily on a nearby boulder, drawing his knife. Kneeling beside him, Caroline tore strips from her petticoat. The fabric was pristine, a poignant relic of her former existence. She dampened it in the creek and started to cleanse the laceration on his arm. His muscles flinched beneath her ministrations. Easy, he grunted. Sorry, she breathed, her touch unwavering. As she worked, she studied the etched lines of his face, the clench of his jaw when her pressure intensified. You've lived many lives, haven't you, Eli Stone? He hesitated, then eclipsed enough. Enough to fill several, she pressed, emboldened by the shared closeness. His blue eyes, vivid against his sun-bronzed skin, finally met hers. Some devils you never exorcise, he murmured, his voice gravelly. They just abide. She finished cleaning the wound and began the binding. Which devils? She prodded, scarcely above breath. He looked away, his gaze lost on the canyon wall. The ones I'd buried deepest. Caroline secured the bandage. Everyone carries ghosts, Eli, she stated, her tone resolute. Sometimes, naming them lightens the load. He remained quiet, but a subtle shift flickered in his eyes, a chink in his armor. She reached out, her fingers tentatively grazing his rough-hewn hand. My father, he was a man of the cloth, she confessed, the words rushing forth unbidden. A good man. He preached hope, even in the darkest corners. But then they arrived, accused him of inciting rebellion, dragged him away, and I never saw him again. Her voice cracked, and she averted her eyes, ashamed by the sudden vulnerability. Eli remained silent, yet he didn't withdraw his hand. After a long moment, she resumed. After that, there was only me, just trying to survive, trying to keep that ember of hope alive. He offered a gentle squeeze. And you have. She met his gaze, a tentative smile gracing her lips. I'm trying. He stood. Let's see to that shoulder, he directed, his voice rough-edged but kind. She hesitated, then nodded. As he carefully assessed the bruising, his fingers brushed against her, sending a tremor through her that defied the injury's pain. Finished, he fashioned a makeshift sling from another strip of cloth. Rest it, he instructed. We'll stay put for a bit. Let you mend. As the sun retreated behind the canyon's embrace, draping the sky in fiery hues, they settled into silence, the only sound the snap and hiss of the small fire Eli had coaxed to life. A sensation of tranquility, foreign yet welcome, enveloped Caroline. They were still fugitives, still vulnerable, but here, within this hidden haven, they found sanctuary. For a time, at least, Eli produced a water skin, offering it to her. Their fingers danced a fleeting ballet as she accepted it. She drank deeply, then returned it. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, his gaze holding hers, a prolonged moment of shared understanding. "We face this together, Caroline." His words reverberated, both a promise and a gauntlet. She knew, with an unwavering conviction, that their ordeal had just begun. Yet here, cradled within the canyon's heart, she was no longer alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to nurture that fragile ember. Shadows of the past. The first sign was the crows. Not the usual scattering of black feathers against the dawn sky, but a concentrated, agitated flock circling the ridge overlooking the small cabin. Eli felt the prickle of unease on his skin, the old instincts humming. He glanced at Caroline, who was humming a tuneless melody as she mended a tear in his shirt. "Visitors," he said, the word clipped. Caroline paused, needle poised. "Friendly ones?" Eli didn't answer, moving to the rifle propped against the wall. He checked the load, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. Outside, the crows grew louder, their cries frantic. He positioned Caroline behind him, near the back door. "If they come close, you run. Head into the woods. Keep moving. Don't look back." Her eyes widened, mirroring the fear he felt but wouldn't voice. "Eli, what's happening?" Before he could answer, the thunder of hooves shattered the morning calm. 3 riders crested the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. Their shapes were hard, menacing, rifles held across their laps. "Bounty hunters." "Stay put," he ordered, stepping out onto the porch. Eli Stone, the lead rider, a hulking brute with a scarred face, bellowed. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and the woman too. It'll go easier on her." Eli spat on the dusty ground. "You want me? Come and get me." The brute grinned, a flash of yellowed teeth. "That's what I like to hear." The first shot cracked the air, splintering the porch railing beside Eli. He returned fire, fast and accurate, forcing the riders to scatter. The fight was on. He moved with a brutal efficiency that surprised even him. Years buried beneath the surface, the outlaw honed by countless skirmishes resurfaced with terrifying ease. He used the terrain, the cabin itself, as cover, picking off his attackers one by one. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the screams of wounded men. One of the bounty hunters flanking the cabin managed to dismount and scramble toward the back. Eli whirled, firing, but the man was already too close. He dove for the door, tackling Caroline to the ground just as the cabin wall exploded inward from shotgun blast. Splintered would rain down on them. Eli surged to his feet, shielding Caroline with his body. The bounty hunter, a wiry man with cold eyes, stood framed in the shattered doorway, leveling his weapon. Eli lunged, knocking the shotgun aside and driving his fist into the man's jaw. The bounty hunter crumpled. Eli didn't stop. He grabbed the man's head, slamming it against the hard-packed earth until the struggling ceased. He stood there, chest heaving, the world blurring at the edges. He looked down at his hands, stained crimson, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He was back there in the darkness. Caroline pushed herself up, her face pale. She stared at the body, then at Eli, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and understanding. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He couldn't lie to her anymore. The blood, the violence, it had stripped away the facade he'd so carefully constructed. "I wasn't always a rescuer, Caroline. Before I met you, I was one of them. An outlaw, a killer." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He watched her face, searching for a flicker of revulsion, of fear. She said nothing for a long moment, her gaze locked on his. Then, she reached out, her hand brushing against his bloodied one. "Is that who you are now?" she asked softly. "Or who you were?" He closed his eyes, the weight of his past pressing down on him. He didn't know the answer. Betrayal and capture. The first harbinger was a quiver, not of the earth, but in Eli's coffee, the surface of the murky liquid shimmering almost imperceptibly. Caroline, darning a rent in her homespun skirt, glanced up, a crease forming between her brows. What was that? Eli's hand instinctively dropped to the well-worn Colt strapped to his thigh. Incoming. Before he could elaborate, The deceptive tranquility of their secluded canyon haven shattered. A fusillade of gunfire ripped through the air. Bullets snapped past, peppering the crude lean-to they'd cobbled together against the canyon wall with dust and splinters. "Barlow!" Eli bellowed, pushing Caroline behind him. He returned fire, each shot a measured response, devastatingly accurate, but their advantage was negated by sheer numbers. Barlow had brought a posse, strategically placed to control the narrow canyon mouth. Caroline fumbled for the rifle he'd taught her to wield. "We gotta move." "Nowhere but up," Eli countered, firing a round that sent one of Barlow's men reeling. "Cover me." He lunged for the rope ladder he'd secured to a treacherous ledge halfway up the rock face. As he ascended, a bullet kissed his shoulder, drawing a sharp grunt and a momentary loss of purchase. Caroline unleashed a withering barrage, pinning the posse down. He gained the ledge and reached back to haul Caroline up, but fate intervened. Barlow materialized at the canyon entrance, a cruel smirk distorting his features. Two of his men seized Caroline, wrenching her arms behind her. "Eli!" she shrieked, the sound echoing in the confined space. Eli hesitated, his hand extended in vain. He could jump down, make a stand, but it would be a futile gesture, a dance with death. He'd only ensure his own demise, leaving Caroline to Barlow's tender mercies. "Get out, Eli! Go!" she screamed, struggling fiercely. He made a lightning decision, his stomach twisting with icy dread. He was powerless to help her now. He had to survive, to find a way back. "This isn't finished, Barlow!" he roared, disappearing over the precipice. Barlow's laughter, a dry, rasping sound, pursued him. "It is for you, Stone. Tell the devil I'm coming." He raised his rifle and fired. Caroline's heart seized as she witnessed Eli's fall, his body a ragdoll tumbling against the unforgiving terrain. A strangled cry tore from her throat, raw with anguish and boiling rage. Barlow, unfazed, issued a curt command. "Tie her tight. We're taking her back to Dusty Gulch." Caroline was frog-marched back to Dusty Gulch, the setting sun painting elongated, ominous shadows across the stark landscape. The town stood silent, a tableau of fear as residents peeked from behind tightly closed shutters, watching her forced march through the parched streets. She was thrust back into the same jail cell, the clammy, cold stone a tangible reminder of her utter powerlessness. The fragile flame of hope, kindled during her sanctuary with Eli, seemed to sputter and die, leaving only the ashes of despair. Later that night, Barlow visited her cell, radiating the fumes of cheap whiskey. He leaned against the bars, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction in the gloom. Well, Caroline," he drawled, "back where you belong, it seems." Caroline met his gaze, her eyes blazing with undisguised loathing. "He'll be back, Barlow." Barlow emitted a mirthless chuckle. "Don't bet on it, sweetheart. Eli Stone is buzzer bait. I watched him kiss the dirt myself." Caroline stubbornly clung to denial. She had to believe he was still out there, fighting tooth and nail. It was the last ember of hope against the encroaching darkness. Yet, as she stared into Barlow's cold, unwavering eyes, a tremor of icy dread snaked down her spine. What if he spoke the truth? What if Eli was truly gone, forever beyond reach? And what bleak fate awaited her then? Ghost Town Showdown. A searing throb pulsed behind Eli's eyes, each beat a hammer blow. He squinted against the sun's brutal glare, the desert air thick with dust that rasped against his raw tongue. Fragments of memory flickered, the report of a gun, the flash of pain, darkness closing in. Death should have claimed him. Yet here he was. With a grunt, he hauled himself upright, muscles aflame. His fingers traced the crude bandage wrapped around his wound. A wilderness dressing, functional if not gentle. The vista offered no solace, only endless expanse. Barlow and his thugs had vanished. Caroline. The name galvanized him. He staggered, regained his balance, and pressed onward, ignoring the insistent ache in his skull, the weariness that threatened to pull him down. Caroline was captive to Barlow's cruelty. He had to reach her. The trail, carelessly left, practically shouted its direction. Barlow, arrogant in his assumption of Eli's demise, had made no attempt to cover his tracks. They led northward toward the saw-toothed peaks. Eli recognized the landmarks from fireside tales. Whispering Gulch, a ghost town swallowed by the desert after its silver veins ran dry 2 decades prior. A fitting haven for a viper like Barlow. Each step was an ordeal, his body a rebellious machine. But the vision of Caroline's indomitable spirit, shining through even the darkest trials, spurred him onward. He discovered a discarded waterskin, coaxing the last meager drops onto his cracked lips. As he approached the gulch, the atmosphere grew heavy, saturated with the silence of broken dreams. Buildings slumped, their empty windows like hollow sockets staring blankly at the forsaken land. He advanced with caution, senses sharpened. The wind keened through shattered panes, a desolate symphony. He found them in a dilapidated saloon, its swinging doors askew, revealing a tableau illuminated by slivers of light filtering through the boarded-up gaps. Barlow lounged at a dust-caked table, a whiskey bottle his only companion. Caroline was bound to a chair, her face drained, but her eyes defiant. 2 of Barlow's men stood sentinel, rifles leveled at her. A triumphant sneer twisted Barlow's features. "Well now, look what blew in with the sandstorm. I figured I'd left you for buzzer bait, Stone." Eli stepped into the saloon, his hand instinctively near his Colt. "Release her, Barlow." "Why would I do that? She's proven rather spirited. A feisty one, this." He stroked Caroline's cheek, eliciting a flinch. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it in ways you can't imagine." Eli's voice was a low, menacing rumble. Barlow chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "You're hardly in a position to bargain, Stone. Overwhelmed, outgunned, and half a corpse." He motioned to his men. "Finish him." The gunmen raised their weapons. Eli, fueled by adrenaline, moved with surprising agility. He dropped to the floor, his Colt barking. One of Barlow's men gasped, clutching at a blossoming crimson stain on his chest as he crumpled. The other fired blindly, the slug whistling past Eli's ear. Eli scrambled behind a toppled table, using it as a shield. A charged silence descended, broken only by the metallic click of weapons being reloaded. Caroline's gaze darted between the 2 men, a mixture of fear and fierce resolve in her eyes. "This doesn't have to end here, Barlow." Eli's voice cut through the tension. "Let her go, and I'll disappear. Think I'm a fool, Stone? You'll run straight to the law. My life's forfeit either way." Barlow slammed his fist down, making the whiskey bottle jump. "No, I intend to relish this. I'll watch you bleed out, then I'll do as I please with your little acquaintance." Caroline spat in his face. "I'd choose death over your touch." Barlow's face contorted with fury. He seized Caroline by the hair, yanking her head back. "Perhaps I'll simply kill her now and save myself the aggravation." He pressed the muzzle of his revolver against her temple. A cold dread gripped Eli's heart. He knew he had to act, and his moment was now. He drew a ragged breath, steeling his nerve, and prepared to launch himself into the fray, fully aware that it might be his last stand. Justice in the dust. Dust devils cavorted down Main Street, a flippant mockery of the dire circumstances. Barlow's men, a dense swarm, tightened their circle. Eli's expression hardened as he thumbed the cylinder of his revolver. Beside him, Caroline smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I've got a notion," she breathed, nearly lost to the wind's howl. Utterly mad, but it just might work. He arched a brow, yet experience had taught him to heed her hunches. "Name it," he prompted. Caroline inclined her head toward Mrs. Henderson's mercantile. "Every bolt of thread she owns, every color in the place." While Eli covered her advance, Caroline darted into the store, reappearing moments later with a flustered Mrs. Henderson trailing after her. Caroline shoved a heavy sack into Eli's hands. "Time for some mayhem," she declared, her gaze alight with daring. They took up positions across from each other, near the livery and the saloon. As Barlow and his posse advanced, Caroline unleashed her chromatic storm, flinging handfuls of thread skyward. The wind seized the vibrant strands, weaving them into a dizzying, multi-hued vortex that momentarily disoriented the deputies. Eli capitalized on the confusion, his shots ringing out with deadly precision, crippling two horses. The panicked beasts whinnied and reared, escalating the chaos. Barlow, however, remained implacable, his eyes like chips of flint. He pierced the flimsy curtain of thread. "Stone!" he bellowed, raising his rifle. Eli returned fire, forcing Barlow to seek cover behind a water trough. The final reckoning. Meanwhile, Caroline put the next stage into motion. She'd spotted a stack of discarded newspapers huddled behind the saloon. Striking a match, she ignited the brittle paper. A thick plume of acrid black smoke billowed skyward. "Fire!" The cry ripped through the air, spreading like the flames themselves. The townsfolk, previously paralyzed by dread, began to stir. Too long had they suffered under Barlow's thumb, and the sight of his authority crumbling sparked a nascent rebellion. Eli exploited the shift in momentum, moving with surprising agility to flank Barlow and wrest the rifle from his grasp. It clattered onto the parched earth. "It's finished, Barlow," Eli stated, his voice a dangerous murmur. But Barlow wasn't conceding. "Helunget, ketching ili unavore." A brutal struggle ensued, a frantic ballet of fists and elbows. Driven by desperation, Barlow possessed unexpected strength, but Eli fought for more than survival. He fought for Caroline, for the town, for a future unshackled from corruption. With a final surge of power, Eli slammed Barlow to the ground. He stood over him, chest heaving. "Everyone look!" Caroline's cry sliced through the pandemonium. She held aloft a small, worn ledger, salvaged from Barlow's office during her thread raid. Barlow's accounts, the bribes, the stolen deeds, the rigged deals, it's all here. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as onlookers craned to see. A few emboldened souls edged forward, seizing the ledger and reading the damning entries aloud. Barlow's transgressions were laid bare for all to judge. The town's response was immediate and volcanic. Years of suppressed outrage erupted. They surged toward Barlow, faces twisted with fury. Eli backed away, letting justice unfold. He couldn't be their perpetual guardian. They had to liberate themselves. As the crowd engulfed Barlow, Caroline came to Eli's side, her hand finding his, her touch grounding. "They're doing it," she murmured, her tone laced with quiet triumph. "They're finally free." The dust began to settle, revealing a town reborn. The air hung thick with smoke, yet a new aroma permeated the scene, the fragrant promise of hope. Barlow was gone, his reign of terror at an end. The future remained uncharted, but for the first time in years, it felt within reach. Eli gazed at Caroline, her face streaked with grime, yet her eyes burned brighter than any celestial body. He knew their trials were far from over, but in that instant, amidst the emancipated town, he experienced a tranquility he hadn't imagined possible. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could forge something enduring together, something real. A new beginning. The steady clang of hammers offered a soothing counterpoint to Dusty Gulch's gradual healing. Sturdy saloons, built to last, replaced the flimsy shacks of Barlow's reign. The aroma of Mrs. Henderson's baking, cinnamon, and resilience overpowered the lingering stench of charred wood. Even the dust seemed less agitated, no longer stirred by the frantic trampling of thugs. Imperfect justice, like a fragile seedling, pushed through the cracked earth. Those who'd borne the brunt of Barlow's cruelty now shaped the town's future, their voices raspy with resolve as council members. Eli observed the scene from the jail's porch, the sinking sun drawing elongated shadows across the thoroughfare. He'd helped where he could, pitching in with the reconstruction, yet a deep unease persisted. He felt spectral, a lingering echo of the violence. He didn't belong here. Caroline appeared, a steaming mug warming her hands. "They're considering you for sheriff," she announced, offering him the drink. Eli sampled it. Chicory, bracingly bitter. Sheriff isn't in my nature, Caroline. They need someone trustworthy. Her gaze remained steady, unwavering. He shifted his focus to the horizon. Trust is a weighty mantle. More so than guilt, she countered gently. The question lingered, an unspoken truth hanging between them. Eli knew his past was inescapable. It was branded on him, a permanent scar. He'd witnessed too much, committed deeds he couldn't undo. He was unfit for this burgeoning tranquility, for the hope infusing Dusty Gulch. I'm leaving, he declared, the words like cinders in his mouth. Caroline didn't react. When will you go? Sunrise. She settled beside him, the planks groaning. Silence descended, punctuated only by a distant guitar melody from the saloon. Do you believe escape offers a solution? She inquired finally. That riding off will somehow negate the past. It offers you a chance to forget I existed, he replied, turning to face her. Firelight flickered in her eyes, mirroring a strength he both admired and envied. I have no desire to forget you, Eli. Her voice was a mere whisper, laden with unspoken sentiments. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. He yearned to withdraw, to shield her from the darkness that clung to him. But the connection proved too compelling. Their hands intertwined. There's a stain within me, Caroline, one I can't wash away. We all harbor shadows, Eli. Our actions with them define us. She tightened her grip on his hand. Dusty Gulch needs you. I need you. He studied her intently. The resilience mirrored in her eyes, the delicate lines of worry etched around her lips, the unwavering optimism that radiated outward like a signal fire. She had confronted the worst facets of humanity and emerged fortified, more resolute. And she desired him. What kind of existence could we forge here? He queried, his voice laced with uncertainty. The kind we build, stone by stone, she answered, her tone resolute. An existence where we champion justice, where we safeguard the vulnerable. An existence where we discover solace, even amidst turmoil. He knew the truth of her words. Flight offered no deliverance. It would merely leave him tormented by the specter of unrealized possibilities. Here in Dusty Gulch, with Caroline at his side, he possessed the opportunity to construct something new, something significant. A chance for amends, not through erasing the past, but through sculpting a brighter future. He rose, drawing her up with him. The last vestiges of sunlight vanished, leaving them immersed in the soft radiance of lanterns illuminating the town square. Stay with me, she pleaded, her voice raw with emotion. He cradled her face in his palms, his thumbs tracing the delicate curves of her cheekbones. I'm not going anywhere, Caroline. He bent his head and kissed her, a slow, tender communion conveying shared sorrow, nascent hope, a future they could cultivate together, beam by beam, brick by brick. The distant hammering resonated, a promise of transformation, a symphony of second acts. He was staying. He was finally home.